I require a lot of support. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's you have an absolutely wonderful city. I've spent the day wandering around yesterday. It's the first time I've been to Boston. It is fabulous, and so I'm taking away with me a lot more, I think, than I'm leaving. But I was going to tell you a little bit about our story. There's nothing more annoying than somebody coming from far away and telling you exactly what you need to do in your home. But what I will do is talk about some of the things we've tried and how some of that turned out. And more I'm convinced there's not a lot of brand new ideas out there, but there's a lot of great ideas, and we're all sharing them and trying them, and they work to varying degrees in different places. You probably know Vancouver's on the west coast of Canada against the American border. You probably don't know it's I'm an amalgamation of 22 cities in the Metro District. It's about 1,100 square miles. The City of Vancouver, the largest of the cities, is about 44 square miles, and so we work cooperatively on a good day in terms of regional transit planning, and obviously the cities have a mandate around active transportation, walking and cycling, and so I'll leave with a few thoughts about the regional, but maybe I'll start at the city level. The city's been around for about 125 years. I guess we're just a baby compared to you. It was originally a streetcar city with a couple dozen communities and neighborhoods connected by streetcar and a road network that developed into a fairly dense road grid throughout the city with back alleys and lanes. And so in our DNA, our frame, we're set up to be pretty successful with transit and walking, just based on the structure of our city. And so that's been a bit of an advantage in terms of getting started. In the 50s, 60s, and it peaked in the 70s, we resisted the desire, the urge, the mandate to build freeways. There were lots of studies that said it was the only way we could be successful as a city. This was at a time in the 70s when we had a 90% drive mode share and 10% transit. And so ultimately it was a grassroots revolt from the public that resulted in the mayor and all of city council being thrown out of office, and a whole new generation and breed of politicians that came in the 70s. And that was the first big significant, recent significant change where we went a bit of a different direction than many cities. Also in the 80s, we had an active plan in our downtown core to concentrate our commercial and business district onto a smaller footprint and to actively encourage residential into the downtown peninsula. So today we have over 100,000 residents in our downtown core and a much more compact business area. In '97, we completed a major transportation plan, and City Council was quite innovative at the time. Our engineering department and our planning department were warring against each other, and we didn't cooperate, we didn't talk, and I see some cities around North America that are still to varying degrees in that environment. And so City Council saw that, and in a visionary move they said, look, we'll take 3 engineers and pluck you out of your department, we'll take 3 planners and pluck them out of their department, we'll send you away into a think tank, and we want you to come up with something different. And I was lucky enough to be one of the engineers that joined that group. And so we came up with the '97 plan. The '97 plan said no increase in capacity for cars. And so we knew we wanted our city to grow, we wanted it to be vibrant, we wanted more population, more jobs, and many, many more trips. But we had a road network that was pretty well built out throughout the city, and so we understood that the only way we were going to increase capacity was tear down buildings, and that wasn't going to happen. So we wanted growth, we wanted more trips, but the growth was going to have to come through walking, cycling, and transit. And we prioritized the modes, as you can see as well. So that was another step in a little bit of a different direction in terms of where many cities have gone. So we've had the benefit of time. It's another 15 years after that. We started looking at data to say, well, how did that work? Was that a good choice? Was it a bad choice? Where did it take us? And so we saw that we had an increase in population citywide. We had an increase in jobs. And while our policy was to keep the number of vehicle trips about the same, what we found was citywide, the number of vehicle trips dropped, absolute numbers about 5%. And in the downtown, it was even more exaggerated, more increase in population and jobs, but a 20% drop in vehicles entering into our downtown core. So while our policy was just to keep the number of vehicles about the same, what we found was that as we improved the walking environment, as we improved options to cycle, as we added very large increases in transit capacity, what we found was the change in behavior was much more significant than anybody guessed or dreamed, and people shifted, making rational choices much more quickly than we anticipated. And so we've seen a decrease, which has provided us some opportunities in terms of reallocating road space. I should preface this, and I should have started at the beginning. This journey, when I come up and give you a quick 20-minute rundown of a couple of decades, it sounds like it was easy, and I should be really clear that this is changing behavior. This is about people, and there's nothing easy about that anywhere in the world, anywhere in North America. And when I look at, meet with your transportation staff, we can share all kinds of war stories about hard-fought changes, and so a lot of it. I have an undergraduate in engineering, a master's in business, and I really wish I would have studied psychology or sociology, because that's really the skill set I should have in this job. So how have the trips been accommodated? Transit was doing a lot of the heavy lifting, walking and cycling. And we'll talk more about the use of land use and mixed use and the need for really, really high quality urban design and architecture, and how key that is, particularly in promoting active transportation more. So we were ready to do another transportation plan update. We collected data. We saw that it was working okay. We kind of liked the path we were on. We were getting ready to launch into our 2040 transportation plan. And then the big party was coming to town. We hosted the Olympics in 2010. So we didn't have the resources to put together both an Olympic transportation plan and a long-range transportation plan. And the Olympics had an opening ceremony and a deadline, so that obviously took precedence. But we made a conscious effort in developing our host city Olympic plan, was to use that as a bit of a laboratory to do some future testing and see if we stayed on this path that we're on, if we continue to see this transition to walking, cycling, and transit, we continue to see opportunities to repurpose road, if we continue to see a decline in the number of vehicle trips, what does that look like, and what do people think about it? So that was our explicit plan in developing this. And really the challenge is in hosting a major event, whether it's the Olympics, and we're talking about national conventions in Denver. Really, you've got less roadway. So that top picture there shows we had 30% less roadway based on security closures. That's one of our major bridges accessing the downtown. Those are buses queuing up for the opening ceremonies, and because of the huge volumes of pedestrians, having to repurpose some of the roadways for pedestrian movement. So we had 30% less road, and we modeled about a 30% increase in travel and trips. And so that was the challenge, the fundamental challenge we had. And 30% more trips starts to look like that. That's 350,000 people moving through the downtown core every day. And so really the only way a plan like that worked was transit and walking. Those were the only two modes that you can take and just dial up in terms of scale, that you can double or triple. Vehicle, you can't double or triple the number of vehicle trips. And even cycling, you can't, even with bike parking and infrastructure, you can't double and triple the number of cycling trips in that short time. So walking and transit were the key to mobility during the games. We found lots of Olympic transportation plans, but we found very little post-mortems or data afterwards, and I understand why. When we were doing the Olympics, it was just like nonstop and completely overwhelming. But because we knew and had heard that that was going to be the case, we partnered with local universities to collect data for us. And so we had an army of students out all over this town during the games collecting data. So what we found was we actually had an increase of 44% in trips, not 30%. I'm glad I didn't know that going into the games. I probably would have quit. But it worked. We found that we had more than double the number of trips on walking, cycling, and transit. And during games period, we had a 61% mode share for walking, cycling, and transit. So, and the city was alive. Now, obviously, that was a special event. Everyone was partying, and we won a lot of gold medals, so that helped. But people liked the mobility, the fact that we were able to get around the city. And it wasn't about being able to drive around the city. It was about just having mobility to travel and get about and do your business. And remember, in our downtown core, right in the epicenter, we have over 100,000 residents. We have our commercial districts, our business districts. So we needed to have a functioning a functioning urban center. And Vancouver was the largest city to host the Winter Games. Summer Games have been in larger cities. And so it was a major challenge for us to have a functioning urban center with 44% more trips, 30% less roadway, and have it operate properly. So with that, we were ready to launch into our 2040 plan. And with all of our work at the city, we work towards some high-level city goals. And those highest level goals are we have a healthy people strategy around health and happiness. And that's one of our pillars, mandate. We have a greenest city plan, our sustainability plan, that's around the environment. And we have the city's economic development strategy. And the economic development strategy, in a sentence, is building a city that attracts the brightest and the best from around the world to want to live and work there. And we find in the industries that we've targeted, that's one of the biggest challenges they have in terms of getting people. You know, whether it's education and medicine or digital, high-tech, media, creative jobs. The biggest challenges that employers have is getting the best people. And so that becomes our mandate, is for all of the departments, and particularly for us in transportation. What can you do in developing your plan that's going to turn the dial on these high-level city goals? So isn't that a great mandate to have? Go out and build one of the best cities that helps to attract the brightest and the best from around the world. And so that really energizes all of our staff as we get out and launch into a transportation plan. It's so much broader than just mobility. You'll recognize those three things as the legs of the sustainability stool. Well, we're in the transportation biz, so we say it's the three wheels of the tricycle. And while you need all three, people, economy, and environment, in order to function, all three wheels are important. They're not equal. And the wheel at the front is the biggest one. It's got the pedals, and it pulls along the other two. And I've been at the city now for 26 years, and so I've lived through the transition where we've had different attributes of that front wheel. As I mentioned, in the 90s, it was about livability. And so people were at the front wheel. And then in the 2000s, we paid a lot of attention to climate change, greenhouse gases, our ecological footprint. And so the environment was that front wheel, and that was driving and energizing a lot of the work we did. And then 2008 came, and the crash hit, and now it's about economy, stupid. And that's where our focus really is. Now, again, all three of the wheels are essential, but it's really about driving the economy. And so that's how we're strategically positioned in all the work that all the departments are doing. Keenly aware of all three, but with the economy clearly leading the charge. It's more than just about mobility, as you know. I mean, there's all kinds of incredible benefits and around health and safety and livability and resilience, and too, as we look at climate change. Our downtown core, where 75% of the trips within the downtown are by walking. The price of fuel goes up. Our residents downtown aren't even aware of that. They many of them have cars, many of them don't, but they may drive every second weekend, and their lifestyle doesn't revolve around a car. And yet out in some of our suburban areas, they've already had to make very difficult lifestyle changes because of the price of fuel, price of operating a vehicle. And so in terms of resiliency and building a city for the future, again, tremendous synergy and tremendous benefits with the work that we do. The 2040 plan sets targets, and in 2020, the goal is to have more than half of our trips by walking, cycling, and transit. That would be a quarter of them by walking and cycling, and a quarter of them by transit. And by 2040, to have 2/3 of our trips by walking, cycling, and transit. Again, a third of them by walking and cycling, and a third of them by transit. And as we work, remember that blue wedge, because as we work with our regional transit provider, that's really what we're passing on to them as a mandate. For our city to be successful, for our region to be successful, for us to move forward on all of these goals, we need for the transit system to have that capacity to move that kind of number of people. And I show these as a bar graph, and the orange at the bottom is car trips. And the reason we show that as a bar graph is because we used to have a pie chart, and we'd show it as you move off into the future, the car percentage got smaller and smaller. And I'd speak in groups, and I could see the anxiety start to rise in the room as the drivers were saying, "It's a war on the car, you're trying to squeeze me out." And so the point of going to these bar charts is simply, there were a lot of car trips in 2008. There's going to be a lot of car trips in 2020, and there's going to be a lot of car trips in 2040. But the mandate we have, the challenge we have, the challenge for us to be successful is not the orange bar at the bottom. It's how do we grow the walking, cycling, and transit. That's the challenge in terms of moving forward. The car piece is not the story. We need a road network that's efficient, effective, that functions for buses, trucks, and cars and automobiles. And the only way that we'll have an efficient, effective road network is to have the growth trips taking place in walking, cycling, and transit. And hopefully we'll see the same kind of trends in the future where actually that behavioral change will take place faster than we anticipate, and we'll have some extra road space available to us. Another key goal in the plan is fatalities, a goal of zero traffic-related fatalities. And this shows our fatalities over the past number of years, and if you extend it out over the past few decades, it's moving in the right direction, but it's not zero. And so it is a very different way of thinking for us if we're working towards zero. And you can see in 2010, 11, and 12, we were getting pretty nervous there. I didn't want to do a linear interpolation of where that line was going, but then in 2013, now we've come back down again. And so we know that the fatalities, while a majority of the collisions are with automobiles, we know that the fatalities, the deaths, are very disproportionate into vulnerable road users. We know that they're about 80% walking, cycling, and motorcyclists, and only 20% vehicle drivers. And so we really need to focus on pedestrians. Are about 60% of our fatalities, and that's where we focus. This is some data that's out there. It shows mode share on the bottom, and it should be no surprise to you. You guys are the walking capital of North America anyways. I don't know about the world, and this shows fatality per 10,000 daily trips. And so not only do you have lots of people walking, you're also very safe relatively, and so we're chasing you. And again, I said, we're looking at what you're doing and trying to learn from that. For cycling, it's a different group. Portland and Minneapolis are leading the cycling numbers, and so again, while we're relatively safe in terms of number of fatalities, it's not zero, and so it is a very different type of work that we'll be doing into the future. So what's the content of the plan? I passed out a one-pager. It shouldn't be a surprise. There's not a lot of new things. There are a lot of things you're seeing in cities, both your city and cities around North America. Absolutely, this link, the synergy between land use is absolutely essential. I like to say that the planning department does all the heavy lifting in terms of mixed use, really high quality urban design, and it helps my stats, and I get to show them off. And so that's a key part of it, is mixed use, high quality urban design, no blank walls anywhere in the city. I mean, if there's one fundamental rule, is no blank walls. Either in commercial districts, having small storefronts. If it's not a commercial district, some of these, high quality urban design, beautiful spaces that people want to walk, that invite you. You have your favorite places in the city, the favorite streets you always walk, and probably the ones you never walk on. Well, do more of the ones you always walk on and less of what the other ones look like. And designing, we talk about designing to a human scale, but also to a child scale. Because it makes it a lot more interesting. In terms of pedestrian space, addressing gaps and promoting a walking culture. This is one of the projects. This is a corridor right through the middle of our downtown, Hornby Street, and that bike lane on the edge just about killed us. It was something. Well, I'll talk about it during cycling. But anyways, this is a corridor that goes right through the downtown with a beautiful tree canopy and really creates a walking environment. Interesting use of public space. We've got a number of streets in a program we call Viva Vancouver, where we close streets and celebrate them during the summer and during the good weather. This is in our downtown core next to our courthouse, where we close that section of street. And then we have a design competition every year. This year, those white blobs are big beanbag chairs they made out of a Teflon roof of a building that was being replaced. And so they were all recycled afterwards, but these giant beanbag chairs. Sometimes it's actively programmed, sometimes it's passively programmed. So just put in tables and chairs and let people experience and enjoy the area. In terms of active program, This is Granville Street, which is a bus mall in the downtown core. So Monday to Friday, there's 60,000 bus passengers going through here. Saturday and Sunday, the demands drop way off, so we move the buses one block either side, close the street in the summer. And this was swing dance. They have salsa dancing. Lululemon had 1,000 people doing yoga. And so they do all kinds of different programming in the space through the summer. Converting, I saw in I got a copy of your Complete Streets Guide, and so I know these are all things that you have in your book. Down at the bottom there, we convert some parking spaces to public space. This is different than a sidewalk cafe, where a cafe is controlled by the business. In this case, the business pays for and maintains the space that we convert, but it's public space and open to all. And the businesses are paying for it because they see the value in having added public space in front of their storefronts. Our street food program has been very, very successful. We used to have an incredibly successful program. You could get anything you wanted as long as it was a hot dog. And so now we have a wide variety of food that's locally sourced, healthy options, and so that was a big part of that mandate, tied in with our Greenest City plan in terms of the type of food and the availability of it. In terms of bikeways, we're designing, our target market is very specific. There's a bunch of research there. There's about a third of the people that will never ride a bike, and that's okay. There's maybe a small percentage, depending on how you measure it, that you really don't have to do anything for it. They're confident cyclists, sometimes aggressive cyclists, but you really don't need to build any facilities. I've heard them called mammals, middle-aged men in Lycra. So they're out there. You don't really need to do much for them. But our target market is the 50 or 60% in the middle. They're interested in cycling. They want to try cycling, but they're concerned about safety. They're concerned about riding next to vehicles. So the facility on the left, Paint, doesn't do it. And so if we're on an arterial street that we can't reduce the traffic, then it's a physical barrier between the bikes and the cars. And we also have neighborhood bikeways that go through residential neighborhoods. And on those streets, we do have the ability to traffic calm and reduce the number of vehicles. We try to get them below 500 vehicles a day. And so in those cases, we'll do traffic calming, closures, circles, bulges, that sort of thing to bring down the vehicle volumes. And so all ages and abilities, that's our target market. It has a higher percentage of women and girls. It has a higher percentage of seniors. I like to think they're the smartest of society. So anyways, if you build for them and we measure the demographics, then we get to measure and see how successful we are in reaching out to that target market. And so these are some of the facilities we've built in the downtown core where we're providing those physical barriers. And the reason there's no physical barrier in that one area is it's a truck loading zone, and so some of the big trucks come through and have to drive through that swath. But as I said, these projects are hard, and that Hornby Street that I showed you, we completed that a year and a half before our next mayoral election, and it became a central theme of the election. It became a key point for the opposition, and the mayor had to run on his decision to build that lane, and he was re-elected with a larger majority than he was elected the first time, but nobody knew that going in, and so it was a very, very difficult time. And now we've got another election coming in November, and it looks like bikes are shaping up to be a central theme again. And so as much as we try to stay out of the limelight, we end up there, not in a good way. We don't build many new streets, but when we do, incorporating cycling into design, we have an asphalt bike path and a concrete sidewalk, try and make it intuitive where people are supposed to be. Again, we partner with both universities and with our health department to try and measure the benefits that we get from the infrastructure we install, the concrete that we lay. So Comox Bikeway goes through our downtown core, and we've partnered for studies on children, on the population in general, and on seniors to see what lifestyle changes will happen in this neighborhood. We've collected the before data, and starting next year we'll start collecting the after data. But not only the obvious in terms of mode share, and do they walk more and do they cycle more, but with seniors in particular, one of the major challenges we have is a feeling of isolation as seniors age in their homes, in place, even though they're in familiar surroundings, fear of going outside and interacting and concerns about safety, a lot from cars. As I said, 60% of the fatalities are pedestrians. And so wanting to see how we can help to improve those feelings of isolation, help the quality of life with our senior population by building projects such as greenways that have benches and water fountains. And we heard loud and clear washrooms, lots of washrooms along the corridor. I mentioned we've got lower vehicle volumes, and so it gives us the ability to look at repurposing some space. And so I'll just touch on a couple of big projects that are on the books for next year to bring forward. Granville Bridge is one of the main bridges going into the downtown. It's 8 lanes. We never have more than 4 lanes of traffic on it. And so we're looking at a greenway down the center to improve walking and cycling on the corridor. Developer at the north end has already funded the pilot project because of the benefit it'll have to his project, and hoping to bring that to council next year. While I said we don't have freeways, that's not to say we didn't build some sections of freeway incrementally before the final decision was made not to install a freeway. And so we have the George and Dunsmuir viaducts that lead into the downtown. We think there's a better use of land than this, and so it takes 2 solid blocks of valuable downtown real estate that's tied in with these overhead freeway. It performs a complete barrier between some really interesting neighborhoods, Gastown, Chinatown, that are close to the water, but you would have no idea because of this barrier that the freeway creates. So we had a design competition. It's interesting with the internet, more than half the ideas came from outside of North America. And one of the big ideas that came in that we weren't actually planning beforehand was to build a road through the area that provides connectivity, but take down the freeways. And that connectivity still provides the accessibility, but allows increase in parkland. Those 2 solid city blocks will provide development opportunities to advance our affordable housing initiatives, and just knit those neighborhoods together in a way that gives them better access to the water. And the last couple of slides, I'll just talk about regional transit. The city is one of 22 cities and First Nations in the region, the metro region. Transit is provided by TransLink, a regional supplier, and it is one of the fastest growing transit systems in North America. The line on the bottom is our rail rapid transit growth with the access on the right, and the line on the top, the blue, is the overall ridership. And what we see is that as they provide capacity, as they provide more buses, as we provide more rail lines, our ridership just jumps and jumps and jumps. And so we're always in a situation where we're chasing. We're trying to provide enough capacity to meet the demand. And certainly the demand is much higher in Vancouver in our core than it is in some of the suburban areas. One thing that's interesting, you see the big jump for the Olympics. We brought in a huge fleet expansion, both rail and bus. You saw the significant jump in ridership for 2010. Now, most cities would then drop off for a few years and slowly kind of grow back up. We went up another 6% the year after, and another 6% the year after that. And so it really is, an insatiable demand and a key part to reaching our goals. In terms of regional planning, so this shows the entire region. The orange lines are the rail network, and the blue is kind of a heat map that shows population and job density combined. And so by 2040, we're looking at a 50% increase in population, a 50% increase in job, but which is staggering. But we are quite happy that the growth plan, our regional growth plan, to show how that growth is expected to take place, is actually following the plan. Our plan, our regional growth strategy, is to keep green what is green, and the most recent plan it draws a boundary property by property to keep the agricultural land and the park space intact, and to put people where there are people, both jobs and population. So intensify the use that already is being used, and leave the green what's there. And so our rail coverage is pretty good. There's 2 key projects that we're looking at in Vancouver. It's the Broadway subway out to UBC. Right at the end of the line there is the largest research university in Canada that's not connected to rapid transit, and also goes through the second busiest population and job corridor in the province. And to the bottom right are 3 light rail lines, in Surrey, which is the fastest growing municipality in Canada. And so we had talked a little bit about bus rapid transit, and a lot of the analysis shows that maybe bus rapid transit would suffice the demand for quite some time. But you get into questions of equality and perception, and so there's, the residents in that area really feel like they would be second-class citizens. They want to have rail. Why can other areas have rail, not us? So we move past a technical analysis very quickly into a political decision, because again, we have 22 municipalities and a First Nation that have to come to a collaborative decision to move forward on our regional transit. And we're hoping to go to referendum in about a year and get some added funding, because the regional transit provider TransLink has been had funding challenges right from inception. Just last one is also rapid bus. We have a whole hierarchy of different bus service, and so rapid bus is bus service is regular. You don't need a schedule. You just come and wait. It comes every 5 minutes, 10 minutes in peak periods, and also express buses. And so by providing this rapid bus network, a higher level of express buses, we have pretty good connectivity through all the areas where we expect to see the growth. So we're hoping with that and the land use and the active transportation that we'll sort of stay on the path we're on. But I'll close by saying it is not easy. It's all about behavioral change. It was a key policy for us not to increase the road network. That resulted in a mandate and an urgency around growing the other modes, and it's worked for us so far. But I am the most hated man in Vancouver in terms of congestion and parking and bike lanes. So it's not easy anywhere. So with that, I'll wrap up, and thank you. Happy to answer questions afterwards.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. I was just in Vancouver this last week, so it was great to, to hear Jerry's presentation, and I got to experience a lot of what he was talking about. It's an exciting time for Boston to be thinking about these issues and to be thinking about transportation. And part of the reason it's so exciting is that there's probably never been more innovation in transportation in so many different ways than there is right now. And so really looking forward into the future is kind of an exciting exercise. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how Washington, D.C. has framed this issue. So I changed jobs, right? I'm now at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, but I was the planning director in the District of Columbia for the last 2 mayors, and really, transportation was my favorite thing. I was always making the transportation director meet with me and talk to me, and until he finally gave in and said, yes, Harriet, the best transportation strategy is a good land use strategy. And then I knew we were going to be friends forever. So part of this is a story about a turnaround in a city. So in 1999, the District of Columbia had a financial control board. That's kind of like, that's a bad thing. That's not quite Detroit, but we had a terrible imbalanced budget. We're like Boston. Half of the land is off our tax rolls, so we have to, make do with not so much revenue. And like many other American cities, we had been very steadily, very regularly declining in population since 1950. Inexorably. So our tax base was shrinking and shrinking, and we didn't really see a way out of it. Lots of cities had what I would call push factors that played a big role. Let's call them crime, terrible schools, and bad public services. So we really tried to address those things in a very systematic way, and I think there are some larger national trends that particularly helped us on crime. We had a couple of really good mayors who focused on improving public services, and schools is a work in progress for us. But we also had some things that were kind of important, and that was a transportation network that was already a big deal. I'm going to come back to some slides that show this change in the growth trend, but I have to say more so than any other single factor in the District of Columbia, it was a transportation story. Transportation became the basis for our economic development, for the diversification of our economy. I mean, I really would attribute almost everything to those transportation investments. And we're now growing at about, in the city, about 1,100 people a month. More growth than any other jurisdiction in our whole region last year, which is unbelievable. When we were shrinking every year despite being in a growing region. And our job growth has also not been too shabby. But it started when some very wise people in our region, beginning in the 1950s, when the car culture was really grabbing hold, they did strange things. They decided to invest in a heavy rail subway system. There were a couple of other jurisdictions who did this as well. Atlanta was one of them, but it was really kind of going against the trend. And even though we invested in this system, it didn't have tremendous ridership in the early years. But I have to tell you, like Boston, if you didn't have the subways, you'd really be in a terrible way. And all the other transportation options that we now have are possible because we also have this very high capacity system, this legacy system that's very important. And I'll talk about a lot of the other things that happen. But basically, being multimodal, having transportation choices has meant a world of difference. And now we come to realize what this choice really means. It is a luxury. It's a luxury that a lot of places don't have. So it's a real distinguishing factor among cities, right, to be able to be near transit. And this message really came home during the recession. Jerry mentioned it also. It was really tough, globally. It was tough in American cities. But in our market, in our regional market, where it's the same job and housing market, the jurisdictions, we also have 22 in our region, they fared very, very differently, extremely differently. And that was really a wake-up call. I noticed in 2008 that hundreds of cars were coming off our Department of Motor Vehicle rolls, just dropping away. Why? Because people could dial down their transportation costs when they had an economic event in their family, right? If somebody had a loss of hours or had to change jobs or a spouse lost a job altogether, and they were able to stay in their homes because they could dial down those transportation costs. And that just wasn't possible everywhere in the region. And, many of those people have probably bought cars again, but just like the example in Vancouver after the Olympics, once people realized they could get by going from being a two-car family to a one-car family or from a one-car family to a no-car family, a lot of them said, this works just fine for me, and now I have a lot more money in my pocket, and it is a luxury. Just like Jerry, we're also really interested in attracting the best and the brightest, retaining the best and the brightest. And one of the other bizarre things about our country right now is the biggest concentration of debt is not in credit cards anymore. It's in college loans, student loans. So, that's a crushing amount of debt that a lot of students have. And you must feel it here in Boston with all the colleges and universities that you have. But I knew our strategy was working when we became the city and the place in America that has the largest concentration of college debt, the District of Columbia. So I was like, all right, this is working. These transportation choices are really working because people are moving here. 60% of our growth was people under 35, and they had in the 40,000s of dollars of college debt. The national average of indebtedness, if you had a college debt, was in the 20s. So we were the highest in the country, but yet we had the second lowest default rate in the country. In the most highly educated region of the country, the people moving to the district were much more highly educated than the regional average. And so it used to be that people followed jobs. Now jobs follow talent. So suddenly, in the government town that was the District of Columbia, all these private sector companies started coming to town because the people they wanted to hire were already there. So it tremendously diversified our economy. Every year, for the last half dozen years, the government has been actually shedding jobs. But the private sector jobs have more than made up for those government losses, much more than made up. So it's been an amazing thing. So the subway system that I mentioned that gave us the capacity to move lots of people around the region helped us to do a lot of other important things. Bike share has been really amazing in our city. You have Hubway. I know that you must love it. It has been successful for us beyond our wildest imagining, in part because look at those numbers down there, 42,000 annual members, more than 400,000 casual users who pay, basically 1/10 of the cost of an annual membership every day that they use the system. So they're way subsidizing the annual users, which has been great. So if you're and they also don't read the fine print, I guess, on the machines as well. They might take about a bike out for a whole day, which would really cost them. The regular members know that you can go anywhere for free as long as your trip is 30 minutes or less, and that we have so many stations now throughout the city that there's no reason you would ever have to keep a bike out more than 30 minutes, really. So you often just pay your annual membership fee. So it's been amazingly successful, and most months operates in the black, right? Think of that, a transit system, because that's how we think about it, that operates in the black. Pretty cool. Streetcar. We were once a city that had a 100-mile network of streetcars, and the last streetcar closed more than 50 years ago in the District of Columbia, but they're back. We are now planning a 50-mile streetcar system, but what has been important to us is also how we plan this system. We have a lot of transportation choices, but still, like any city, access isn't great in every place. So one of the things that we really studied was where in the city did people have a very hard time getting to the job centers of the region, where they had more than a 60-minute transit trip. Where could we add transit capacity that would reduce that travel time? And it was mostly in areas east of the river. And on the east side of the city. So we deliberately looked at routes that would help to improve that. And we also, this is kind of a map of some of the streetcar system that we're considering now, 50 miles in our new long-range transportation plan. So we're doing it in phases. But it's the very first phase, our very first line, the first phase of it opens in about 30 days. We also knew that we wanted most of our growth to go along transit lines. And what's kind of exciting about this is that with the streetcar network, the first 37 miles of it, we're going to triple the number of residents who live within a quarter mile of transit. I mean, triple the number of people. So think about that. That both means the population growth that's coming is going to go along those corridors, but it just means so many people are going to have choices that they don't now have. But the other thing that's happening in the city is we're getting a lot more, not just bike sharing, car sharing, ride sharing, all kinds of sharing. I stayed at an Airbnb when I was in Vancouver. I'm fully into the sharing economy. And a lot of it is driven, I think, by millennials, right? Because they're so much smarter than the rest of us, right? And they're not going to have the income that their boomer parents had, honestly. But they're so smart that they're going to have the quality of life without the income. So they've been saying, who on earth would take a depreciating durable good, park it 95% of the time, let it collect parking tickets, but pay for it all the time? Who would do that? That's what a car is. It's in the average in the U.S. is it's driven 5% of the time, parked 95% of the time. They want to drive, but they don't want to pay for the car when they're not using it. So this car sharing, ride sharing, all of it enormously proliferating. And I'm gonna talk a little bit at the end about what the implications of that are for a long-range transportation plan for a city. Because this is a strange asset, that we have, this thing that we don't use very much, but that we give so much real estate to, right? According to Don Shoup, is it 6 to 7 parking spaces for each and every vehicle in America? Oh my God. And what do you do to repurpose a parking garage? An underground parking garage. if you don't use it like you think you're going to. With that's slanted. How about a slanted underground parking garage? Oh my God, it's not so great. So we're using our resources more intensely. All of our resources. That's the future in cities. Use every asset more intensely, and this is a great target of opportunity. Privately owned automobiles, really not very well used. People love choices, right? That's almost like an American value, choice. We love choice, and choice makes a very big difference. Our stats are almost exactly what Boston stats are. 38% of households don't own any vehicles in both of our cities. More than 80% of households are car light. They have one or fewer vehicles. So they want a choice environment because even if they own a car, they might be at a part of the city at some time without a vehicle. They want another choice, and they don't want to have to drive all the time. We make right now 46% of all our trips by walk, bike, or transit, and that choice is literally valuable. Literally valuable. Let me show you another. So people who have these choices, even when you own a car, you can let it get really old, like our car is, very low mileage. You can keep it forever. You're not paying very much for it, and the savings really add up. We spend our citizens on average 11% of household income on transportation. The regional average is 19%. Think about what a difference that makes. So a lot of people are putting those savings into real estate, and we can talk about that as a problem, not just as a good thing. And people have a very strong preference about living where they have those choices. So again, it's a signifier for cities. Not everyone can offer these choices, but having an enormous multitude of choices is very, very important. And transit has become so important in our whole region that 28% of the region's real estate value is within a half mile of our metro stations throughout the region. It's only 4% of the land. And right now, of all the commercial office under construction in our entire region, 84% of it is within a quarter mile of metro. Not a half mile, not a mile, like almost on top of the metro station. So everyone is saying in our region, oh my gosh, transit is our future, absolutely our future. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. It's been very key to revitalization in some parts of the city. This is a street that had been decimated by the riots that our city experienced in the wake of Martin Luther King's assassination. And I lived a couple blocks from this street on the third attempt to revitalize it. That was in the early 90s, third failed attempt. What made the difference was the streetcar line. The plan to put streetcar here, and then the streetscape and the land use changes that we made along the corridor. That was the thing that changed everything. 120 businesses have opened on this corridor, a mile and a half long corridor, and the streetcar hasn't even opened yet. I mean, you wouldn't believe how much it's transformed. This was an area that was industrial. We didn't have a lot of industrial parts of the city. It was not very far from Union Station, but it was all industrial. So in between the Union Station and the Rhode Island Avenue Metro, there was a pretty long stretch. So we had an unusual collaboration, and in 2000, I guess it was in 2005, we opened our first infill station. So we added a station along the line. It was paid for 1/3 by the city, 1/3 by the property owners, and 1/3 by the federal government. And it was immediately wildly successful. And this whole area, just since 2005, got an amazing amount of development there. It's a whole new neighborhood on former industrial land. We have a sustainability plan, an ambitious plan to be the most sustainable city in the U.S. by 2032, and we have transportation goals. We'd like to make by 2032 75% of all of our trips walk, bike, or transit. I told you we're 46% today. So it's a stretch objective, but we don't think it's at all going to be difficult to reach. Because that's absolutely how things are trending now. We're going to complete our first 37 miles of streetcar network. We're going to expand our bike share program. We're going to expand car sharing, especially to the unbanked. right? Right now, a lot of these sharing services are only available to people who have credit. So it's going to be very important that we figure out ways to let everybody have access to these systems. And we talked a little bit earlier about electric vehicle charging. That's another goal. So we're headed for more growth, accommodating a lot more growth. We're expecting some weird things. Larger households, that's not the demographic trend in the U.S., but we have universal pre-kindergarten for 3- and 4-year-olds in the district, and that has done amazing things to both economically integrate the public schools, but also it's like worth $20,000 per child per year. That's what daycare would cost, so it's free all-day daycare, and it has made a huge difference. It's actually caused families to form, which is a weird thing that if you think that an economic incentive could cause a family to be created, but that's what's happening. So we have a lot of young families in our city for the first time ever, or for the first time since the 1950s, really reversing some important trends. So you can see where we've got both many more children, many more young college-educated folks, and a big increase also now in empty nesters, now compared to 2000. I mentioned our baby boom. We're expecting to get a lot more children born. We're getting about 9,000 a year now, but we expect more, and young families are actually even moving into the city. So the change in the economy has also meant this. Our median income went up by 21% from 2000 to 2010. So with that comes some fiscal capacity, to reinvest in transit and to reinvest in other things. A big thing we're going to be investing in is affordable housing, because look at the change in housing values. So as a percentage, the darker the area, the higher the percentage change, but every neighborhood has seen significant increases. And the places where we're putting in more transit are going to see more changes. So it's important, if you're investing in transit, to get out in front, if you can, to acquire the land, to use the land. I mean, sometimes you can use, sometimes you're taking land for transportation facilities. You could put housing on top of that land as well as transportation facilities, but you have to think about it before you've laid out exactly where the lines are going to be going, because the speculation doesn't really wait. And we're not a shabby place when it comes to subsidized housing in the district. We already provide more than 40% of all the subsidized units in the entire region. We're only 14% of the households, but it's not enough. It's not nearly enough. So we're going to have to be doing a lot more. We have committed essentially a new $167 million last year, committed to preserving and producing more affordable housing. And we've also pledged to dedicate now 50% of our budget surplus to affordable housing every year, which will add, that should put us at a steady state of about $250 million a year on affordable housing. It's a lot, but we're seeing a lot of price pressure. And we're going to be channeling that growth, to metro stations. That's been the past, but that's also going to be the future for us. Between just 2010 and 2012, 80% of the housing units, 91% of the office, 100% of the hotel rooms, right along our metro stations. We're going to have a few more choices when we add streetcar, but that transit oriented development is going to be very important. We're also trying to redefine housing affordability. I mentioned that we have low transportation costs, but higher housing costs, and that this is true for us, but also for the region. That drive to qualify was the thing that tanked so many of our jurisdictions around the region, and it caused a major reset. So much so that I'll talk about what happened in the region in just a minute. Parking, got to tackle parking. That probably made me the most hated person in Washington. We've rewritten our regulations on zoning for the first time since 1958, and this was the most contentious topic. In 1950, we imagined a city that somewhat came to pass, very automobile dependent, very. The assumption was every single person of driving age would have a vehicle. We at one point we almost got to that. But we are not that city now. We're not, we have the same parking requirements as like Irvine, Texas, right? Why would that be? When 38% of our households don't own a car, where half of our trips are walk, bike, and transit, and when parking is a huge expense when it comes to housing, right? $15,000 to $50,000 a structured parking space. And we looked at our Board of Zoning Adjustment to see if we were granting parking relief. Well, heck, almost 200 cases, almost all of it routinely granted. So why wouldn't we change our zoning requirements? So I'm not going to go over all of them. Let me just say that we're getting rid of parking minimums downtown. We're cutting across the city. We're cutting the minimum parking requirements by about a third, and if you're near transit, we're cutting it again by half. So we still have parking minimums in some parts of the city, but in a lot of places, very, very low parking requirements, and a requirement, we won't have maximums because we want parking to be shared as much as possible. So if somebody insists on overbuilding, we might let that happen, but we'll give their number out when they have that excess parking to give to somebody else. But we're actually going to require people to do mitigation if they're parking considerably more, 150% of the required parking. More bike parking, more tree planting, more bike share stations. So the wake-up call that was the recession has changed our DC suburbs. We now have more urbanizing suburban than any place in the United States. And some of the places are poster children for sprawl, like on the covers of books. And it's a trend throughout our entire region. And we have more of this kind of what they're calling walkable urban places now happening in the suburbs by number than actually in DC neighborhoods. And most of these places, 77%, are going to have transit, rail transit. That's in their plan. Some of it's already under construction. This is a topology that we're using in our region to help different communities think about how they make this movement to be more urban. Not everyone wants to be downtown or anything like it, but they're all looking at a much denser, more mixed-use future that's based on transit. Activity centers that we have modeled on traditional towns, urban centers, different types of transit hubs. And one of the places is Tyson's Corner, which was basically a shopping and office complex connected by enormous amounts of surface parking. Now we might call that a land bank because they're using every bit of it to put in a new urban gridded network of streets and lots of housing and development all served by transit. And it's happening throughout our region. So it's a very exciting development, and I think we're going to see it in other places. From their own guideline at Tyson's, they want a hierarchy of pedestrian experiences within each neighborhood to reinforce an integrative, connected network that provides safe, functional, and enjoyable pedestrian environment. Because, indeed, the pedestrian is the indicator species of a great city. You need to have lots and lots of pedestrians. So with that, I'm going to just leave you with a couple of thoughts about the future. How many of you are excited about the notion of driverless cars? So how many of you think it will happen in the next 20 years? All right, let's think about driverless cars and what this might do. So things like ownership. Why would you want to own a car? For convenience, right? Convenience, there whenever you want it. What if the car just came whenever you called it, like a really obedient dog? You never have to park it, you never have to fuel it. It comes when you need it. Isn't that convenient? That's what driverless cars are going to be. Why would you own one? Why would you bother to park one? You could, right, remember we're using our vehicles 5% of the time, if that. So think about what it would do if vehicles got used 50% of the time, right? Because lots of people are using a single vehicle at different times, and they were ubiquitous everywhere. We would have, half the cars or more gone from our city streets. We wouldn't have to park them. We wouldn't have to store them. It would be amazing. And if we did store them, we could store them more remotely. Not on our busiest streets that could now be all pedestrian or transit or parks. So I think that's something that's going to happen. So and I also think technology is very important, right? In many cities, including mine, the information about when transit is coming is an actual substitute for increased service. I don't care that it might be a 40-minute headway for my favorite bus on the weekend, as long as I know when it's coming, because I got plenty to do at either end of my trip, as long as I know. So technology is important. Innovation is important in the transportation field. It's another signifier. So for Car2Go and for Park Mobile, the mobile parking app, The fastest ramp up for those two companies anywhere on planet Earth was in DC, and now lots of technology companies, transportation innovators want to be in DC because our peeps love this innovation. They jump on it, they tweet about it, they are all over it, and we have very fast adoption, so people get a sense of whether their product is going to be good or not, and it's attracting other types of innovation. So all I would say is the future is very exciting for transportation, and I know you're going to have a great conversation about it here in the Boston area. Thank you.
Yep. And then if you need a laser pointer, this is it.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thank you for having us. Being the last person, I know I'm standing between you and dinner or whatever, so I'll move through this pretty smartly. I thought Harriet was going to say when you call a car, they come like an obedient husband. But you said dog, so all right. More reliable. Exactly. I'm the CEO from Denver, Colorado, and just a little bit about me. I did 25 years in the Army, active duty time, retired from the Army in 2000, and got into transportation by mistake. An ad in the newspaper, answered the ad. I'm in transportation, CEO of one of the probably one of the most dynamic transit agencies in the country. So I say that because I was given an objective or a mission coming in, especially as a CEO, to get this expansion program done that we call Fast Tracks that I'm going to talk about. And I take missions very, very seriously and objectives very, very seriously. And so I titled this presentation, Witnessing the Transformation of a North American City Through Transportation Investment. I know that's a long title, but I think that's what's happening in Denver, Colorado, in the metro region. People are witnessing the transformation of a city, and it's all because of transportation investment, infrastructure investment. And it's very, very exciting to see this. The culture, the mindset. I was talking to somebody earlier today, and many of you know out west, you know, you have your car or you have your horse, you pull up with the horse, you're at the saloon, you strap it to the post, you go in, have a drink. I mean, everybody has their horse or their car. So this is a whole different mindset here. I grew up in the city of Chicago, and all we did was transit. And so out west, it's a different kind of thing. And so people are seeing this transformation. I don't know if we'll get to the point where people feel guilty driving their car or sneak out at 2 o'clock in the morning and sneak into their car because they feel so guilty. I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon, but it's very, very exciting to see this. A little bit about my agency, fairly young agency. Large service area, 2,400 square miles. That's a big service area that you're trying to provide transportation to. Lots of 2.8 million in population and growing, as Jerry talked about, a 50% increase, I think, in 2040. I was reading something the other day that talked about 80% of the world's population are in metropolitan areas. That's huge. And our infrastructure in our metropolitan areas all over the world were never designed to accommodate that many people. So we've got to do something when we talk about transit and transportation, a balanced system from aviation to public transportation to bikes to walking. We've got to do something with all these people coming to our urban cores. And so this 2.8 million population is growing, not just the Denver metro area, but everywhere. We are funded by a 1% sales tax. 0.6 cents on our day-to-day operation, and then 0.4% on this expansion program that we call Fast Tracks. Now, we went out to the ballot in 2004 and asked the voters for an increase of that 0.4%. And what I found out is that people don't know what you're talking about. When we go out and we say we want to raise taxes for 10%, they don't have a clue that that's 4 cents on most $10 purchases. They don't have a clue. You have to explain it to them. You have to educate. And what we were talking about, how we were going to use that 4 cents was to build the next slide that I have here, a fast track system, 122 miles of light rail and commuter rail, almost 20 miles of bus rapid transit, lots of new parking, 57 new stations, which is that whole transit-oriented community / development approach. But we were building all of this with that 0.4% increase in sales tax. And we had to explain this to the residents because, again, people have no clue what you're talking about when you talk about building stuff. Let me go back to this slide because this is important. Leading up to that ballot initiative, we had some success in building previous rail lines. And we finished all of these pre-Fast Tracks projects ahead of schedule and under budget. And I think that's very, very important if you're about to go out for a tax initiative. Is there confidence in the public agency to build these things? Because I have to say, I think there's just not a lot of confidence out there around the country that public agencies can bring projects in on time and on budget. And I'm not talking about any specific areas, but I'm just in general. We have to get better at project management in terms of the public sector. So we had some success building up to this initiative that we had in 2004. And so that was very, very important. I will say, when you look at what we proposed in our program, it was it is a very ambitious program. It is very, very ambitious. And the thought then was to build all of this out. This was supposed to be a 12-year program. And so you see all the miles there and all the stations and all that, a 12-year program. Well, it didn't turn out that way because we got hit with the worldwide recession. And getting hit with that, you have to explain why you can't build all of the things that you thought you could build with the original forecast. And so I'll talk a little bit about the hub, because right in the center of this, and I don't know if you can see this, right in the center of this, and by the way, the colors, let me talk about the colors. All of the orange is what's under construction right now. The bottom part, this bluish color, was our existing system when we went out in 2004 for this sales tax increase. All of the orange is under construction. This aqua color is the first line that we've opened in this Fast Tracks plan, and the green is what we still have to do. I will say that all of this orange, all of this was the color green, meaning no construction had started in 2009. In 2009, we had no orange on that map. And people were saying, well, wait a minute, you went out to a vote in 2004, and this is 2009, you have no construction, because people don't understand NEPA and environmental, you know what I mean? I mean, hey, listen, the tax was in 2004, where's my choo-choo train, is the question. So in December 2009, none of this was colored orange, and now we're almost finished with the things that are in orange right now. We developed a motto, and it was hokey, and I was mocked for it, but it was build as much as you can, as fast as you can, until it's all done. And what was ironic about that was it caught on so quickly, and it was so popular that the bids that we received from contractors had that stamped all over their pages, their proposals. I thought, man, we finally got through to them, because there is no reason why we should take this long as we take to build stuff. There is no reason. And you know, I'm pushing contractors, I'm pushing troops, I'm pushing everybody to get projects done in a timely manner, because you gain credibility, I believe, with the public when you do that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the hub of this for a minute, the hub of this whole system, which is Denver Union Station, the renovation of a historic station that's 100 years old. That's the hub of this system. And the reason I want to concentrate on this for a minute or two is this. We used 11 different financing tools to do this project. And this is about a $500 million project. And by the way, that whole map that I showed you, the whole Fast Tracks program, is about an $8 billion expansion program. But this hub, $500 million program, 11 or 12 financing tools to include TIFIA loans, RIF loans, private activity bonds, TIF revenue, all kinds of different innovative financing tools to build this project. The reason I bring this up is we have to get better at mixing and matching in terms of innovative finance. I believe that the mega projects that we're planning around the country, we're not going to get all of the money we need from any one source. So we're going to have to mix and match, and the private sector is going to have to come in. On February the 5th, 2010, we stood at this site and we hadn't even dug the hole yet. And 4 years later, we're going to open this whole facility on May the 9th in about 2 or 3 weeks. That is how I believe it should not take us long to build these great infrastructure projects with life cycle costing and all those things involved with it. This is a great project where the revenue, the TIF revenue, and the real estate development around this station is paying off the loans that we used about 10 to 15 years earlier. So we did not anticipate that the real estate and the TIF revenue would develop as quickly as it did around this station. And it's just like buying your house. You go out and get a 30-year mortgage, and you pay it off in 15 years. This is what's happening here, where we're going to pay off the loans at least 10 years earlier. And so nobody can tell me that transportation infrastructure investment does not attract development in transit-oriented communities. So if you're out our way on May the 9th, please come down. Let me talk just a little bit about transit-oriented communities, I call it, because I've taken the development moniker out, because, you know, people get scared of that word, transit-oriented development. It sounds kind of scary. Transit-oriented communities, I think, has a better ring to it, because that's what we're building. We're building walkable areas, walkable communities, and that's what we want. So we actually changed our whole mindset in our agency. The previous administration thought and said that we are just the T in TOD or TOC. We're transit. And so don't talk to me about development and that kind of thing. We came with a different mindset. And I think we all need to come with a different mindset, that if we can do some things on the transit side to make development easier and make it more and facilitate it more, then we should do that as a transit agency. If I can move my bus turnaround area 10 feet to the left to make development easier, then I should be willing to do that. And so we are all partners in this thing. And so the mindset that we are going to help as the transit agency to facilitate development is very, very much in the forefront of our mind. We're advancing TOD. That change of mindset that I mentioned was very, very prevalent. We developed a pilot program around some of our stations to see if we could facilitate or spur development around some of our stations. So we actually called several stations out and said, we are going to use these stations as sort of test or pilot programs to see if we can launch development in community even more so. And so we've done that in 4 areas around our district. Let me talk just a little bit about bus rapid transit. We've touched on this a little bit today, but as part of our plan, we've included 18 miles of bus rapid transit. And I was talking to Nathan earlier about this at lunch. Nathan, right? All right, cool. With the Bear Foundation, and you know this challenge that we have with bus rapid transit. I mean, is it permanent enough? Because see, people want their rail, and when you start talking about bus rapid transit, they think you can pick up that line and move it. You know, it's a bus line. You got that stigma with the bus. And so the challenge, I think, around the country as we build more and more bus rapid transit, which has better mobility, and it's a lot cheaper, as you know. Our challenge, I think, is to brand this and maybe market this whole thing in such a way that people want to ride it. Like the hip people. Somebody said today, the cool people are riding the bus now. That we got to do something. And we have to show its permanency with regard to the build out. And I think that's very, very important. So I talk about the permanency of that infrastructure. Are the stations, do they appear permanent? And how do we convince people that it is permanent? And I think part of this is articulating to our stakeholders and our riders that we're building a balanced transportation system. Balanced in such a way that we've got the airport over here. Once you get off an airplane, you can catch a train to downtown Denver. Once you catch the train to downtown Denver, there's a B-cycle station there. You can get a bike and you can go right to your hotel if you can balance the luggage on your head. So how do we make this an appeal to this balanced transportation system? And then I talk about government support as the last slide there. I think we've been very successful in the Denver metro region because our projects and the progressiveness that has sort of prevailed has spanned multiple administrations. And I think that's key. I mean, in modern times, I mean, we've had mayoral champions from Mayor Federico Pena that went on to be the Secretary of Transportation and Energy, and a guy I still talk to today. He calls me up every once in a while and gives me some advice. But spanning multiple administrations and even spanning agency heads with regard to progressive thought, I think is so very important because many times our elected leaders get in a sort of a stance that, listen, I want all this done in my tenure of office. I got 4 years and I want it all done or I'm not going to start it. Well, guess what? These projects take 10, 15, 20 years. And so we've been fortunate to have that support that spans multiple administrations. I talk a little bit more about some of the ITDP findings. Won't get into those too much, only to say that when we talk about connecting downtown, it's not just downtown, it's employment centers. It's communities of color, connecting those to growth areas and employment centers. So that is what we are looking to do. When you look at the new Tiger grant that's coming out, I mean, that Tiger grant, the big angle on the new Tiger grant, I think it's Tiger 7 or 8, is actually connecting impoverished communities to employment centers. That's the angle of this Tiger grant. And so we should be looking to do that in your various cities. Here in Boston, we're doing it in Denver, Vancouver, DC, I know is looking at that as well, but my application will probably be better than yours. All right. Let me just talk a little bit about the last mile piece, and we talked a little bit about this, and won't go through all of this, but this is the idea of that balanced transportation system. So we started our B-side. They're out there bidding on the 2016 Republican convention. So we'll see what happens with the bikes. I don't know. We'll see. But, okay. Oh, bigger bikes or? Oh, okay. Oh, more usage. All right. Bigger bikes. Yeah, so this has been just a wonderful experiment starting at the Democratic National Convention, and it's expanding so much as we move this. It ties into the last bike. All of our buses now, except for the 16th Street Mall bus, every one of them are equipped with bike racks on front of the bus. So we have really tied into this B-Cycle program. We got bike lockers at various stations, and the ability for people to take their bikes with them, which I think is a huge benefit. A little bit on innovative financing. I talked a little bit about this because I think it's so important that we figure out the money, figure out the finances. The great benefit that I had when I got into the transportation industry and before I was promoted to CEO, 9 years I ran as assistant general manager, sort of the inner support functions of the agency to include finance. And I really got a feel for the financing piece, which I needed, which I think every agency CEO of a transportation agency better be able to figure it out. And I've said this, I was at the APTA CEO seminar and I was talking about the new CEO. Because it's not enough for transit CEOs just to get the buses and trains out anymore. It's not enough. there is another, multiple other skill sets that are required. Land use, financial pieces, the business community. There's a number of things. And I'm not casting any dispersions on any CEOs out there, but we better figure out how to work the finances. When you talk about TIFIA loans and public-private partnerships and private activity bonds and TIF revenue and RIF loans, all of these things, we have to figure out how to put projects together. And that is that's why I put this slide up here, because I think it's so very, very important that we figure it out. I was testifying last month in front of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee's P3 panel. And we went through all the questions, and you know how those things go. You know, you have a 3-5 minute statement, and then they start pounding you with questions. So this one congressman, I won't tell you where he was from, but toward the end, he said, and I guess he thought it was a tough question. He said, you know what, do you agree if we did our job and got some money out there, you wouldn't have to do all these things? And I said, hey, hallelujah, amen. You know what I mean? I am a reluctant genius in terms of financial. If we had a transportation reauthorization bill, we wouldn't have to put all this stuff together. That's what we need. And so it was a softball question, I thought, and I agreed with him wholeheartedly. So we got to figure out the money. A couple of more little pieces here. I included this because, and you planners, there's a lot of planners in the room and project managers, but we have to educate our elected officials. Now, the idea here is what project managers call a triple constraint. Has anybody heard of this? Yeah, the triple constraint talks about at each apex, cost, scope, schedule, you cannot change one of those without impacting the other two. And so you got a project, and I was talking to some of our mayors out there, and you know, you break ground and everything, you got a budget, and by the way, I want to have authority of the full project budget, because I don't want to keep running back to my governing body asking for more money for this and that. I want the full project. That's a whole nother deal. But educating our elected officials, you know, after you cut the ribbon, I've got a budget. Here comes that same elected official. Hey, Phil, can you do an extra bridge over here? You know, sashaying up to me. You know, how about a pedestrian walkway? Well, guess what? You've just changed the scope. You cannot change one of these without changing the other two. You just changed the scope on me asking for a bridge. Now, that's going to change the cost, and it may change the schedule. We have to have, as project managers, I believe, the intestinal fortitude to say no. Now, I know this is tough, but that is why our projects are way past schedule and way over budget. And those same people that sashay up to you and ask you to for that extra bridge, that's the same person, whether it be an elected official or whomever or a board, that's going to beat you up for having your project past schedule. The same one. And so I put this up here, and I go out and I explain this to elected officials. You just broke ground. We just cut the ribbon. You just threw the dirt. Now let me do my job. Don't ask me for anything unless somebody else is paying for it. Last slide, and I had to mention this, and I talk about this whenever I go out and talk to groups, and this is the asset management state of good repair. I mean, just like you change the oil in your car, we must take care of our assets. Now, the idea here and the goal that we've put forth is to transition, as I said in this last bullet, to transition from a find and fix to a predict and prevent. I want to be able to predict what's going to happen before it happens. And if you have a good asset management program, you can do this. I mean, I've got traction motors on my rail cars. The manufacturer says that they must be rebuilt at 500,000 miles. I've got some traction motors. 90% of my traction motors are at 800,000 miles, and I haven't rebuilt them. Guess what? I'm going to challenge that manufacturer. Now, this is not infringing on safety, but I think we have to do things like that. And the only way you can do things like that to challenge what the manufacturer tells you or when to rebuild and all those things is to manage your assets. And that's just an example, but this is so important for us to manage these assets and be in a predict and prevent mode versus a find and fix. So with that, I'll stop there with just a visual of that Union Station that we're about to open on May the 9th. The inside of this building will be a 112-room hotel. We structured a value capture approach with that. This is going to be the Monday night football shot, right? This is going to be sort of the brand and sort of the iconic figure for Denver. So when you see that on Monday Night Football, or when the Broncos ever win the Super Bowl, you'll see this iconic figure. So let me stop there. Thank you for having me.
I wonder if you could comment on, and I don't know how many of you really know not only Boston, but whether you know how our transportation system is either financed, how it's run, how there's a disconnect between government, both at the state level, at the city level, and at the transit level, or what I'll call transit. And on top of it, many of you are showing where you're beginning your systems. We have an old, dilapidated, some cases broken down system. We're trying to do some modest expansion, not that we don't need more, and we're having a difficult time funding it, etc. So I wondered if you might be able to comment on sort of our situation, which appears to be significantly different than yours.
Well, I don't know much about your system. What you described, though, isn't terribly different than some of the challenges that we're facing. We have a provincial government and federal government that provide the funding. There's a transit authority that has had several different governance structures. It was governed by the regional mayors. It went to a private board. And now it's being transitioned to regional mayors overseeing a private board, overseeing the transit authority. Sometimes we wonder whether there's everything to be gained at the senior government level to have the 22 mayors fighting amongst themselves, because at the end of the day, no big checks have to be written. And since the transit authority was created in 1999, where we brought in, buses, rail, some responsibility for a major road network, goods movement, and some coordination of cycling. So bringing together as a ferry system, bringing together all these different modes into one authority, which was thought to be, really progressive in terms of moving forward. The funding never came with it. So from day one, they were underfunded in terms of funding sources, and have been struggling since 1999. So I don't know the answer for Boston. I can tell you that we are experiencing many of the same problems, and I'm hopeful that now the 22 mayors will develop a 10-year plan together. We'll identify some funding strategies, the 1% sales tax. I'm dreaming about, my eyes start to glaze over. That's $500 million a year for us. That would go a long way to building about $10 billion worth of infrastructure and deal with an aging system. We do have some aging state of good repair issues as well. So I think there's similarities in terms of challenges.
I would say, and far be it for me to try to give a whole lot of advice to folks because we all have our challenges. But I would say that the governance structure that you just put in 2009, I believe, where you have all of the modes reporting to MassDOT, I think that was a good move.
Yes.
It is the New York model, and other large regions are going to eventually be going to that. Chicago is discussing that right now. Now, there's some territorial and power issues, just quite honestly, with going to that model. People don't like to give up their agencies, but I think in terms of the shared support services that came with that model, where MassDOT is using, central IT and HR and all of that, is a good thing. I think this is always an issue when you talk about disparate agencies doing different things, even though they're under, one umbrella. And what it takes, I think, is a partnership and a champion that's usually your elected official that demands that partnership, that partnership occur. And I think absent that, agencies are always going to go their own way and have this power struggle, even though you have that umbrella governance model. So I think it really takes someone to step up and say, you will work together or else.
I would just say that our region is 3 states essentially, and it's been very complicated. I think we're the only transit system in the country that doesn't have a dedicated revenue source. So every year we fight and argue about whether or not and how to fund it, right? So it's not great. It tends to encourage a lot of deferred maintenance. So don't do that. But at the same time, we're kind of going away from a unified system. A lot of our surrounding jurisdictions operate their own local bus instead of having the bus system run by the central authority. We've done it now in the district. Some light rail systems, some streetcar systems are also going to be independently run. So I hope that isn't going to be how it always is. But our politics have been very bad. Like for 10 minutes, we're going to have the 3 leaders all of the same party, and then that won't be the case again. So it's often really difficult and very partisan. So it would be good to be mostly within one state to potentially be able to do these things. But sometimes states then have to spread the transportation resources like peanut butter over the entire state. We get a little of that in Virginia. So there's no perfect system, but I think that what our experience in all 3 places is that transit is an incredible asset. It's a central thing to economic growth in the future, and we can't do without it. We're going to have to figure out a way to find the money to make the investments, and more of it is going to have to be locally raised because the federal government is just not stepping up.
Thanks. I wanted to take a minute to follow up on Phil's thought about branding BRT to obviate the stigma associated with the word bus. And some of us here in Boston are thinking long and hard about that, but I was wondering if you could share some of your thoughts about that and how you're approaching that problem set.
Yeah, the way we're approaching that is we have worked with the stakeholders where that BRT is going to run on the marketing of it. And on the service plan for it. And what we've said is, listen, we want this bus rapid transit to be the best one in the country. Now, it has different characteristics. I mean, this is a highway running BRT running, 65 miles an hour. It's in a dedicated lane. It's being shared with high occupancy vehicles, 3 in a car. And we want it to be the best. So what we've said is, listen, we're gonna paint that bus. We're gonna have, I think they went with this moniker, the Flatiron, and so we'll go with that. We want to make it the best because it's very important that we make that BRT the best that it can be, because we actually want to do more BRT instead of rail. And so we want to make this as permanent and as hip as possible. And the way to do that is enhance the rider experience, I think. I mean, make that BRT better than our rail even, is what we're trying to do. And we're doing that through that branding approach, through a marketing plan, through some PR efforts as we launch that. So it's a tough thing because, again, as I said, you got to show the permanence of at least the stations. And so we're trying to do that because the hardest folks you have to convince are the developers. Because the developers say, well, you know what, you building BRT, it's not a train, I don't know if I want to develop around there. And because they think you might move that bus route. And so we're trying to do that, and we're trying to show that it's permanent, and we're doing that through branding efforts.
We have time for one more question.
Thanks. I had two questions for Jerry, but they're quick questions. So they relate to the slides you're showing about the time around 2010, around the Olympics and the run for the Olympics. I noticed that you had a really extreme drop-off in fatalities at that time, and so I was wondering if your thinking was essentially because of the congestion of the non-automobile modes. That's kind of what was driving it that year.
Yeah, I can't speculate why, but it
Okay.
certainly seems
No,
obvious that
no.
we had a significant increase, a doubling of the walk bike transit, and it was our lowest fatality period on time. So it seems to be a connection.
Yeah. And so the other question related to that was it also looked like, and you pointed out that the transit ridership had gone up during the Olympic time period, but then it continued to go up afterwards. And to speculate, do you think that had to do with habits that were formed by people during that period, and they discovered it worked, and they kept doing it and asked their friends to? I don't know.
Yeah, on that one I don't have to speculate
Okay.
because our Board of Trade did extensive surveying around travel patterns and found a very large percentage changed their patterns of the population, changed their patterns during the games, and 63% of them said that they would keep some of those changes going forward, provided that the service levels were maintained. Yes, people did dramatically change their travel behavior, and a majority of them were willing to, they liked it and were willing to, once they got over the hurdle of trying to ride their bike to work and figuring out showers and clothes and closets and all that sort of thing, once they realized that walking over the bridge wasn't nearly as daunting as they might have thought, once they looked at a 2-mile walk as a way of getting their exercise, it was very positive. The board, we should have something on our website, or the Board of Trade did the surveying, and so that wasn't speculation.
I have. I'm going to wrap this up, but with one quick question for each of you to respond to. We are at the Boston Society of Architects, and I know each of you have talked a little bit about the role that funding and communications and technology has played. And I'm curious how you would respond to the role that design has played in the impact on what you're doing and how you see that playing out in the future.
Design is absolutely crucial. I tried to mention it several times in the presentation. It's absolutely key to walking and cycling in particular, and transit as well. I mean, every transit trip starts with a walk or a bike. And it's absolutely key to make interesting places, beautiful places, safe places. The city has the land use, but after that, the urban design, the fit. I mentioned blank walls because it can just be deadly to pedestrian environments, having long blank walls that don't feel safe, aren't interesting, etc. So we in transportation. You affect our numbers in walking and cycling, and it's absolutely key. And we have a phrase, we try not to say density, we say density done right. It's not just about getting the people in a spot in terms of jobs and population. It's about the design, because that's what makes a place. And you've got some fabulous places here that I've seen in Boston, and keep doing it.
I would say something that might make me a heretic. I would say that architecture is not important. design is indispensable. So most of what people experience is on the ground floor. You know, if you, the tops of buildings are best enjoyed from a distance. It doesn't so much affect how we experience the city as pedestrians or bicyclists or transit users. The walk is the really important thing. And so having terrific ground floors, having terrific public realm, those kinds of things are really, really important. And in so many places, we seem like we're unaware of that. We don't care about that, especially in a lot of new development. What you have in Boston is an immensely wonderful network, very different types of streets depending on when the city, that part of the city was constructed, but wonderful connected urban street network, which, you know, that is hugely key. But really, design is all about how you want people to have this experience, and you have so much power over whether or not it's wonderful and delightful, or whether it's a miserable thing, and we just can't pay enough attention to it. So design, critical.
Yeah, and the way I would answer that is much the same. I think design is very, very critical. When you think about life cycle cost, I mean, you know, how you design a facility is, to me, has direct impact on how long it lasts. And so that life cycle costing piece is huge, and it has to start with the design. I would also say that the operating element, and we were talking about this earlier today, the operating element needs to be in on the design. Because if it's designed and I come in as the operator and I cannot operate it because of the way you designed it, then we got a problem. So the operating element or liaison person or persons have to be in on the design. So that person has to be in on it early, I think. The last thing I would say is understand that when I'm in construction, you can't come and keep designing. I mean, that's just, it frustrates the living crap out of me. You know, I'm 50% done with, I'm 50% in with construction, and here comes the architect, or here comes the designer. Listen, we need to change this or that. I think there comes a time when design is done, and you are building. And, you know, when you have a design build project or a design bid build or whatever, or CMGC or whatever you have, I think that everybody needs to be in sync, because if you design something that cannot be built with the cost that you've allotted for the project, then you also have a problem. So I think design is critical, but the operation element has to be partnered with that designer, and then know when to stop designing.
We have a saying, remember, an eraser in the field is a jackhammer. So don't erase too much.
I think that's actually a great point to end on. I want to thank our three speakers, and I have to say I've recently been to Denver and DC, and their phenomenal work that's going on there. I am looking forward to going to Vancouver. I also want to thank again Nick Caruso, who helped us organize this. A number of other people who have been a part of this, including some of them here, Mike Davis, Bill Lyons, David Luberoff, and several others, and the Barr Foundation again. And most especially, I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight, and a reminder that in a little over a month, on May 30th, Friday, we will be having the Mayor of Rome, Ignazio Marino, here to talk about what that historic city, and much more historic than we are, what they have been doing to really modernize the transportation system there. So thank you again, and we hope to see you next month.
Do you know Jim Kunstler? Do you know Jim Kunstler?